All right, welcome to our podcast. I'm your host, Tiffany Herlin, a licensed clinical social worker, and I'm thrilled to have you join us for this important conversation about autism, particularly the way it presents in females and why it is so often overlooked. Please remember that this podcast is not a replacement for therapy. Please always seek a mental health professional for your situation. In this mini-series, we'll be diving deep into the complexities of autism diagnosis, exploring the nuance of masking, and discussing the challenges that many autistic females face in being properly identified. We'll also examine the impact of misdiagnosis, the importance of early and accurate assessment, and how residential programs like Oasis can play a vital role in providing comprehensive support. Joining me for this crucial discussion is Allison Jenkins, a licensed clinical social worker and clinical director at Oasis, a residential treatment program. Together, we'll break down the research, share real-world insights, and offer guidance for parents, professionals, and individuals who may be navigating this journey. So let's get started, because the more we understand, the better we can support and empower autistic individuals and their families to be seen for who they truly are. Thanks for joining us today.
Oh, thanks for having me. I'm really excited.
Yeah, you were in our other series that we had prior to this one on suicide ideation. And you caught me at the end and you said, Tiffany, I have a great topic that I'm passionate about and I really want to share with people who are, in need of this discussion.
Yeah.
So here we are.
Yep, here we are.
So why do so many autistic girls go undiagnosed? In this first episode, listeners, we will be discuss masking, common misdiagnoses, and the subtle signs of autism in females. So tell us a little bit about yourself and how did you come upon this specific topic?
Yeah, that's a great question. So, I've been a clinician for 16 years and I've worked in multiple treatment centers. And when I started working at Oasis, we're an assessment center, right? We do assessment, stabilization, and then we're doing treatment. And these girls kept coming in and they were either asked to leave other programs or they were at home really struggling with big behaviors and emotions. And they were misdiagnosed. They were coming in with one diagnosis, and then after a thorough psychological evaluation, they were leaving with level 1 autism. And I just kind of fell upon it. I wasn't looking for it. I just started seeing the trends at Oasis, and I was like, wait, there's something is going on in our treatment our treatment world. We're missing something, and so I just started kind of leaning into it and working with the psychologist. Now, I want to make something clear. I cannot diagnose autism as a licensed clinical social worker. It has to be diagnosed through a psychologist. So what I do is I look for the clues and I pick up on the nuances and talk to the parents and then work really closely with the psychologist of what we're seeing at Oasis to get an accurate diagnosis.
Well, that is really a tell sign of a really skilled and expert clinician like yourself. Because while, yes, as a therapist, we cannot give that diagnosis, right? We can't do that specific evaluation. Yet it takes a team, right? Especially when at a place like Oasis to do a thorough evaluation and say, what are we missing? What are the pieces that maybe another program, another therapist missed, they overlooked, or they mistaken for something else? And then help gather all that information up, all those puzzle pieces, hand it to the psychologist and help them be able to put them together and do what they do best, right? Yep. Okay, so Allison, what makes autism in females different from traditional autism?
Oh, that's such a great question. So, thinking about, first of all, let's talk about the research, right? The research on autism, this is so crazy. So every research data, any sort of research they're doing on autism, the requirements to do a successful research outcome, they have to have 4 males and 1 female.
Really?
I'm dead serious.
Okay.
Dead serious. And that is still going on today. So
why?
I don't know, because it's, I think because girls mask it. Girls can hide it. Yeah. And we just don't have the research and the data. I think, too, like in the research, it's like they're choosing the female to be part of the study that is clearly on the spectrum. And there's this hidden spectrum, I call it, of all of these girls that are just going, misdiagnosed and And the research isn't supporting how we can support that, right?
Yeah.
And so even from the get-go, females have been underrepresented in research and data with autism. And clearly they're using girls on the spectrum that are not masking, that are really, it's just kind of a straightforward, this girl's on the spectrum. But there's this hidden spectrum of girls that have just gone unnoticed and untreated. And it's really amazing that we're just starting to see all of these girls that are coming out that, they are on the spectrum. And I can talk more about that.
Well, is that because we're seeing this also with ADHD, that women in their 30s are now getting diagnosed with it because, again, they're so good at masking and we're not picking up on it soon enough.
Yeah.
Is that because of the social piece that women have? I mean, not saying men aren't social and boys aren't social, but women seem to have a little more intuitive need for that social piece. And so is that where the masking comes from? Or
and it starts when they're very young, right?
Yeah.
Because they're trying to navigate the world. And if they, when they're younger, if they do something funny and someone laughs, they're reading faces, right? And so they're like, oh, okay. That's a positive interaction that I had. So they're flipping through, and then they're creating like a Rolodex in their heads of all these different positive interactions that they've been in, and then they start masking okay, when I'm with my teacher, I do this. When I'm with my therapist, I do this. When I'm with my parents, I have my mask on, and when I'm with my friends, I have a different mask. And so these girls are really smart too. I want that to be known. They're average to high IQs, and they pick up on those social cues and what they're missing and lacking to fit in.
Interesting.
And then they'll mask and show, to the appropriate person to get the appropriate response back. So then they feel good, right? And they get really good at it.
Yeah. Interesting. I've worked at a residential treatment program for boys and for girls. And the biggest difference I notice is the social piece. Boys, if they have an issue with one another, they kind of duke it out, not always physically, but they and then they move on. Whereas girls, they were just so much more complicated socially, and as a therapist, it was a much more tricky to navigate that social piece with the girls versus the boys. It was really fascinating to see the difference. So let's dive into some of this research you've been talking about.
Okay.
I had some of the from your presentation, because you present on this at different conferences.
Yes, correct. I'm trying to get the word out there because I think it's just such an important message.
It really is.
And I just want, especially with outpatient providers, that these girls, they can go in and for an hour and smile and nod and say everything's great. They can mask for an hour. And they can present as neurotypical because they've learned the social cues from their friends. And so outpatient therapists, outpatient psychiatrists, to really get an accurate diagnosis, they're, coming to a treatment, to a 24/7 where they can be observed and really in all different settings, right? In school, with peers, in the community, in therapy, and they let their mask down. They have to.
Well, it's harder to mask when you are being observed that frequently.
Correct.
Whereas sometimes just going into an outpatient therapist, they're only getting a tiny glimpse into what's really going on, and they only get whatever they tell them.
Right.
Sometimes they'll include the parents, but sometimes not. So
yep, and I think that's why it's going missed. And I'm not saying you can't suspect ASD in outpatient settings, and that's why not everyone has to go to treatment to get this diagnosis. But I just want the outpatient therapists and providers and parents especially to start being aware of
it
the
on their
clues.
radar.
Yes. Yeah.
Well, and if we so often when kids do come to treatment and if they have the wrong diagnosis, you could actually, I would argue, do some harm. And you're going to miss the big picture of what they really need. They're going to stall out. They're going to possibly digress. I mean, there's when
they're going to get asked to leave.
Yeah.
And I'll talk about that too. Putting a neurodivergent girl in a neurotypical program, I mean, that's just too much socially for them to navigate. They can't do it. With 65 girls that are neurotypical, and that's what we see a lot is these girls that are getting asked to leave programs they've been in for years. Years.
Yeah, which it shouldn't be like.
No.
We don't want kids in programs for years.
No, and then they come to us and we're like, this girl is on the spectrum.
Yeah.
It's so, and I guess with our trained eye, we're so used to it now, right? And so then with an accurate diagnosis, then parents can provide and providers can provide the best treatment.
Which can decrease the amount of time they need treatment.
Correct.
And help them get right back on the right path to be progressing in the correct developmental process and eventually become an adult,
Yes.
right?
Yeah.
A fully functioning adult.
Right.
Yeah. So what other research and facts are we finding about this topic?
The research that we did at Oasis, when I started seeing these common, these girls coming in misdiagnosed, and kind of what I want to say is it's just really interesting because I call them the question mark kids, right? So I'll get an ed consultant or a parent call and say, oh my goodness, I have no idea what's going on with this girl. She's been in multiple treatment centers. And I'm like, okay, that's the first red flag. Okay. She's been on multiple medication trials. Okay, that's the second red flag because they're trying to medicate what they don't know.
Yeah.
And there's been medications just thrown at these girls like, oh, maybe this will work. Maybe this will work. And I want you to know it's because they're really treating the wrong thing, right? So I'm not saying these girls don't have depression and anxiety, but I've seen girls come in with bipolar. I'm like, what? And I've seen girls with suspected bipolar, suspected borderline personality traits is the biggest one.
Which we'll talk about.
We'll talk about. Major depression is the main one that the girls come in on when I've done my research. So, so the question mark kids are, those are just some, when I'll get these calls from consultants or parents, and I'll start looking through their clinical, and it's like multiple trials and different levels of care, right? Usually been in outpatient treatment for a long time, years, right? The parents will be like, she's been in outpatient treatment since she was 6 or 7, and we still don't know what's going on. Multiple medication trials, multiple diagnoses, and I'm like, okay, those are to me are red flags. Like, okay, this could be suspected ASD.
Yeah. And we have here that 30% of ASD females become misdiagnosed at admission, which is a lot.
Yeah. So when collecting the data, I was like, oh my goodness. I actually believe after this is data from last year. If I collected the data this year, I think it would be higher, but the accurate data is 33% are coming in misdiagnosed that are leaving with a level 1 ASD diagnosis.
Okay.
Yep.
Well, let's talk about females compared to males with autism. What is the difference there?
Yeah. So females and males. So there's a lot of misconceptions that kids on the spectrum cannot be manipulative. That kids on the spectrum cannot use substances, right? That and I want to talk more about that. So what we're finding is boys will usually present as oppositional defiance, right? Oh, they're oppositional. They can be very rigid. They don't make good eye contact. They like to play Dungeons and Dragons all day. It's pretty black and white, right? Where girls, it's not black and white. They can be manipulative. A lot of times they're very heavily involved in substances. There's a lot of sexually acting out with girls, and I'll talk about that, girls on the spectrum. And it's all about connection, right?
I was just thinking that.
Yeah.
It's got to be.
And they, and when when I'm talking to the girls that have had, they came in as hypersexual, right? And possibly bipolar, it's like talking to these girls, they're like, there's no emotional connection with the sexual act. It's more connection, like they feel included, and it's not like they're like, oh yeah, I had sex with this guy, and it was okay. It was
a lot of times it gets skewed because connection equals emotional attachment, right?
Right.
And so it's not always a sexual act that is the focus.
No,
but it's the end all to getting that attachment that they need emotionally.
Correct.
Am I saying that correctly?
Yeah.
Okay.
Exactly. They want connection, right?
Yeah.
And they'll do anything for connection.
Well, we're all wired for connection, whether you're neurotypical or neurodivergent. Mm-hmm. It doesn't matter. there's a natural need for that.
Yes.
So it's just, sometimes we're just not sure how to get it.
Right. And, if you're thinking of a neurodivergent girl in high school trying to connect and trying to fit in, and she sees a group of kids smoking weed, then she's like, okay, if I smoke weed and they smoke weed, we're connected.
And then I'm accepted into their group.
And then I'm accepted. Mm-hmm. And then, it becomes, a special interest or a perseveration. I've seen also girls on the spectrum with self-harm, right? They find kids online that are self-harming, or they have friends that are self-harming, and then they start self-harming, and then it's a connection, right? A lot of males on the spectrum or boys do not engage in those behaviors. A lot of the times they're isolating. A lot of times they're finding their people and their tribe. The unfortunate thing is boys usually get diagnosed early on. So parents are very aware of how to support the boys, right? Yeah.
Whereas girls are better at coping. They are more social and outgoing. Mm-hmm. You have on here, they engage in pretend play. Mm-hmm. And when they're younger, and they are able to make eye contact.
Yeah, they make really good eye contact. Okay. Or another clue would be they make good but quirky eye contact.
Interesting.
Yeah, and their eyes will kind of, I'm watching them, and it's kind of like, I don't know how to describe it. It's quirky.
Yeah.
They have
something's off.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so, or they'll make really good eye contact because they've learned that,
locked
right?
in.
Locked in. I'm like, wow, that is good eye contact because they've really learned it.
They know, yeah.
And they know, right? They're smart.
Yeah.
And they know how, if I make eye contact, I'm feeling connected.
Yeah.
So
and that's what I'm seeing everyone else is doing.
That's what my peers do.
Okay.
That's what my friends do. That's what my parents do. So they'll just stare at you, and I'm like, okay. So little things like that.
And you had on here they're more imaginative. This is interesting. Repetitive behaviors or interests are more socially appropriate. So sometimes the stereotypical I think we have is a boy on the spectrum who's obsessed with trains, mm-hmm. right? But what would it look like for a female?
Books, horses, being a vet, being a therapist. They all want to be therapists or vets. Loving animals, loving horses. They just get different special interests. And I think the girls that come in for treatment, their special interests have gone askew, right? Yeah. It's either... I've seen girls that on the spectrum that perseverate over self-harm, and that's their special interest of how to get objects, how to hide it, how to do it. Even suicidal ideation can become a special interest for some of these girls, right?
Yeah.
Where that gets stuck in their head.
They perseverate on it.
They perseverate on it. And why the function, right, is because of the connection they feel a lot of times. It's... when they say they're suicidal, everyone drops what they're doing and they get all their needs met. It's not necessarily that they are suicidal. Sometimes they are because they feel alone and isolated. And I don't want to discount that. I'm just saying looking at the function of the suicidal thoughts is so important.
Makes sense.
And the function of everything they're doing, right? We're not looking at the behaviors. We're looking at the why behind it. We get a lot of girls that come in with, they have an eating disorder. They won't eat. They'll only eat chicken nuggets. And then when I dive into it, so that's a good clue to look for. If you're, if they're very picky about food, they'll only eat certain foods. They won't eat different colors of foods.
There's some rigidity around what they eat.
Food and what they eat. It is not an eating disorder. They are just very picky eaters. And so when girls come in and they're like, my daughter only eats chicken and rice. We had a girl that came in that would only eat chicken and brown rice. And, that's just a symptom of autism, right? That is the rigid eating, the picky eating, the sensory issues. There might be a really big aversion to one certain food, like spaghetti. I won't eat spaghetti. I hate spaghetti. And when you look at the function, it's when I eat it, it feels really weird in my mouth, and I just don't like the texture. And when I swallow it, it's really slimy, and it's okay, that's another red flag.
Interesting.
Another thing to look for is FOMO, right? There's a lot of FOMO, and they fear missing out, and that can really interfere with hygiene, using the restroom. because if they're doing something social and they're having fun doing it, they don't want to leave that to go shower. It doesn't make sense to them. They don't want to leave it, even sometimes to use the bathroom. It doesn't make sense to them. And so that's something else to look for. And that's all I have to say about that. Oh, school refusal too. So there's also a lot of school refusal with these kids because they just can't get it. They can't get the social cues. They get behind in school. Sometimes they're overlooked. And so school refusal is very common.
Probably feeds into that anxiety they already have.
Yep. Or if they've said something the previous day to appear, and then they've processed it through the night and thinking, oh, that was the wrong thing to say, they may just skip school.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense.
Yeah.
The bottom line, it sounds like, is they're more likely to be viewed as attention-seeking rather than connection-seeking.
Correct.
Which is what you've talked about.
Yep.
And really, it's not focusing on the behavior, it's focusing on the why, which is they want to feel connected.
Yep.
They feel disconnected, which makes total sense.
Yeah, and if they, and I hate to say it, but there's social media where there's self-harm groups, right?
Or
there's social media where there's, and these girls that feel they're in with their friends, yet they feel so alone, right? Yeah. And then, or they have no friends because they don't know how to socially connect. And so they're home looking at social media and connecting in maladaptive ways, right? A lot of the girls, taking pictures, sending pictures that could be pursued and sending them to their friends of them self-harming. It can be perceived as borderline traits. It's not borderline traits. It's them wanting connection.
That makes sense. So can you explain what masking is and how it plays a role in this diagnosis?
Yeah. So like I talked about earlier, these girls learn from a young age how to socially fit in. Or how to present a certain way. And, like I said, they know they get the response they want, right? So they know how to mask in front of their teacher. Okay, I smile, I sit in my seat, I raise my hand. Okay, good. That's 1 hour of my day. Now I go to my next class. And then I'm masking with my friends just to get that social connection, right? I'm laughing at jokes I don't understand. I'm like, following them around, trying to fit in, like trying to figure it out. And then, they mask all day. And by the end of the day, they're just exhausted. They are so exhausted. And then when they go home, their mask comes down.
You get all the behavior.
And then you get all of the shutdowns, the isolation, the big outbursts, right? The rages that can be also perceived as BPD. And so
borderline personality.
As borderline personality, yeah. Disorder, or bipolar, right?
Okay.
Or, depression.
Yeah.
Anxiety.
So let's talk about challenges in diagnosis. You talked about how they can often be misdiagnosed with things like borderline personality disorder.
The traits. Yep.
So let's talk about what that looks like. What is the difference and what are some similarities we might see?
Yeah, and I think that's the fascinating thing that I found out is a lot of these girls are coming in, oh, it's just borderline. Oh, this is just borderline stuff with the parents and the outpatient providers. Oh, the self-harm, the suicidal ideation, the hypersexuality possibly, the rages, the tantrums, and if you look and you put the symptoms for BPD and the symptoms for autism side by side, they match. It's a very complex process to try and tease out which is which, because autism is a neurodevelopmental disorder, right? That they're born with. Borderline personality can be born with like a predisposition for it. And it's usually caused by trauma or, an invalidating environment. Right. So that's where the testing is so important, because we need to figure out, is this a neurodevelopmental disorder or is this something a trauma response, right? Yeah. Where they were predisposed or they had a parent with BPD. And then that is why the behaviors are coming out. So again, the function, right? Is this, and I'm not saying that kids on the spectrum can't have trauma, because a lot of them do. but that's not the function
Yeah,
of the
that's
behaviors.
where things get tricky. Yeah. Well, we can put up the slide that you have of the two different traits side by side. I think it'd be good for our viewers to be able to see.
I need to, I would love that, because I think you need to, if we go down the borderline personality traits, let's just go about them. The poor interpersonal relationships. I mean, and
which you have autistic characteristics is difficulty making and keeping friends.
Right.
Those look really similar.
They're very similar. The rages, like I talked about, there's something called BPD rages. And with autism,
they have anger and outbursts.
Anger and outbursts, yeah.
So, and then we've got black and white thinking for BPD.
Yeah.
Which, again, exact same for someone who's on the spectrum.
Oh, 100%. And that's another thing that I hear from parents. It's like, oh, they had this group of friends, and they had this best friend, and this best friend did something to them. I'm not quite sure what it is. And then my daughter just blocked her and would never talk to her again. I've even heard stories of like, oh, we used to go into the same music store every week. And she got along really well with the people that worked there. And then one time one person said something to her and she would never go in that store again. I'm like, okay, ding, ding, ding.
Yeah.
So things like that can be perceived as borderline, right?
Yeah. And then next we talked about this attention seeking versus connection seeking, which even we could say BPD is also connection seeking as well.
Yeah.
Right? Mm-hmm. Self-harm for both.
I talked about that.
You talked about that.
It's very prevalent in girls on the spectrum. And like I said, the function becomes like a special interest and definitely connection. Definitely connection.
That makes sense.
There's something called parasuicidal thoughts. Okay. And parasuicidal thoughts are like, kids have them all the time. Adults have them. People have them. Like, oh, like life is so hard. I just don't want to be here anymore. Yeah. I don't want to kill myself, right?
I just don't want to deal with it.
I just don't want to deal with it. And so I think when talking to a lot of girls on the spectrum, that's kind of what I'm finding out. It's like they don't want to die. They don't really want to kill themselves. It sounds painful, horrible, right? In their logical spectrum mind, right? Mm-hmm. And at the same time, it's just navigating social interactions. Like, I talk to a lot of parents that say, my daughter, she did so well in elementary school. She did so well. Like, she was social. She had friends. She had play dates. She made connections. She did really well in school. And then junior high, everything changed. I have a totally different child. Like, I don't know what happened. There was no trauma. I'm not sure what happened, but they totally changed and became really dysregulated, emotional, couldn't go to school, all these things. And I thought about it, and I started interviewing the girls, and I was like, okay, so why was elementary school so easy for you? And why did junior high, like, everything kind of tanked? And it's always like navigating the social interactions in junior high. It's just too hard for them. In elementary school, they have one teacher usually. It's a smaller classroom. There's not a lot of navigating those social dynamics and those interpersonal skills that they don't have, right? So when they go to junior high, it's like they don't know what to do. And if they have underlying anxiety and depression, that makes it really hard for them, and they don't feel connected, and so they tank. So that's another red flag, right? It's like, and I think the myths are kids on the spectrum, when they're younger, they're not socially adept. They are not socially equipped. And with our girls, we're seeing they really are. And then they can't mask. It's too hard for them.
Yeah.
And so that's another clue. So these parents that are just devastated that they felt like they had this neurotypical, healthy, young female daughter, and then they go into middle school, and it's just like, oh boy, game over.
Well, and that sounds like it leads perfectly into like fear of abandonment for someone who's borderline personality, and unstable identity, right? Extreme mood swings versus someone who on the spectrum who drops friends, rejection sensitivity, trying
RSD.
to fit in, dysregulation. So again, looking really similar. It's like a chameleon, easy to cross over both and get them really mixed up.
Yes. And I think that's where the injustice has been done, right? Where, I hear all the time, oh, it's just borderline.
Yeah.
It's just, she's borderline.
Which
she's just borderline.
In our industry is not, when you're throwing that out there kind of with that tone, it kind of doesn't have like always a great, what am I trying to think?
It has a negative connotation. It does.
Where it's like, they're just being borderline.
Yeah.
It's like, no, like there's more going on here.
And think of when you have a parent that is like, I've been told she's borderline personality disorder. What am I going to do? And then they hear, no, she's really on the spectrum. Like, think of that shift.
Oh my goodness.
Think of that shift in mindset, right? And these girls have been labeled, it's just borderline. Let's treat them with DBT, and this is the way they're going to be the rest of their lives. And
which, by the way, neither of these are easily fixed with meds.
No, neither are easily fixed with meds. So it's not like
you can just throw meds at them.
Hence the med trials, right?
Yeah.
The multiple med trials.
Yeah.
And then that's another reassuring factor that it's borderline personality disorder to the parents and to the providers.
Yeah.
If you really dig deep at the function, then you're seeing, oh my goodness, no, this is autism.
Which, as a clinician and parents listening in, you're going to treat those things totally differently. There may be some crossover and some similarities of how we're treating them, but they're really going to have a different treatment path.
Yes. And they're going to, in terms of a residential treatment, I mean, that's why they're failing in neurotypical programs. And if they are actually diagnosed, then they're going to get the right treatment. And I mean, we've diagnosed girls at 17 that have been in programs since they were 13. And once she got an accurate diagnosis, she transitioned home with the support she needed, and she was home. And that's another thing. Girls being passed around to different treatment centers. It just breaks my heart because we're missing it. We're missing it.
You're doing an injustice.
It is
to the girl
and the
family.
families.
Yeah,
it's a total injustice.
Again, coming back to the importance of a thorough and proper and comprehensive evaluation, and the need for that, so that we're putting best interest for our clients and our families that we're working with, and getting them the true help that they need,
right,
and not missing the mark.
Yes.
So you talked about how certain females come in with different diagnoses. Let's talk about what some of those may look like. What about narcissistic traits?
Well, narcissistic traits, and that's another thing that girls can be misdiagnosed as borderline, because sometimes it can seem like there's a lack of empathy, right, with these girls.
Oh, yeah.
But it's really their spectrum, right? They don't know that emotional reciprocity. They have a hard time with that, right? And it's really great when I talk to the girls, because like I just had this girl. Can I just tell this story? So I had this girl that was diagnosed on the spectrum, and I talked to her about like her emotions, right? And helping her understand, because she was like, I feel bad because like I'll see a girl in the corner crying and I don't care. And I'm like, okay. She's like, what's wrong with me? And I'm like, okay, that is your lack of emotional reciprocity because of your autism.
And there's nothing wrong with you.
And there's nothing wrong with you. Instead of, she's like, I've always felt like I'm a sociopath because there's something wrong with me. And I'm like, okay, let's take a step back. And so helping her understand that, she was like, that's how my brain works? And I was like, yes, you really have a hard time with that emotional reciprocity. And so that can present as narcissistic, right? A lack of empathy.
And it doesn't mean they can't have empathy, right? And
Correct.
learn that. It's just not going to come naturally. It's
Yes.
not how they're wired.
Correct.
Yeah.
Yep.
And that's so helpful for parents and individuals who are struggling with this to realize, like, no, there's nothing wrong with you, but let's help you overcome this.
Sometimes parents will say, I think my kid is like antisocial.
I've heard that as well
And
with
I'm
other
like,
friends. I'm like, no.
No.
Yeah.
Yeah. Don't. Yes.
If they have, if they're on the spectrum, they're going to struggle with this. It doesn't mean they're a sociopath.
No. I want everyone to know that the research that we're doing at Oasis, what we're finding is autism and anxiety. Autism and anxiety. So imagine you already have a spectrum brain and you already are perseverating on things, and then you add anxiety on top of it. And then you're really perseverating on things, right? And you're really nervous about things. So that's another thing that the psychologists tease out is like, what is the perseveration and what is anxiety driven, right? And usually they have both. Sometimes they don't, but that's the difference there.
Well, it makes sense because if you, as a female, are a little more socially aware.
Correct.
And you're on the spectrum and you know you don't fit in and you know that you say weird things at times and you know you do odd behaviors.
And you're trying to mask
and you're
all
trying to mask
day.
And you're holding it in. You're going to
Yeah.
have major anxiety and social anxiety on top of that.
Right.
So,
Like, and like a lot of the girls will go home, and this is very common with anxiety and with spectrum. They'll go home and did I say this right? And
evaluate their
whole day, right? And go over, I should have said this. Was this right? Was this okay? And so that level of stress too, and anxiety can just be anxiety producing. Yeah. And then they go, I should have said this, or I could have said this better, or why didn't I say this? And then all that anxiety of sitting with that, plus the perseveration of a spectrum brain is, that's, I mean, and that's
adds
valid.
to
Why?
Another layer, yeah.
Yeah. And it's valid why a lot of these girls need treatment, right?
Yep.
A lot of girls will come in with OCD, right? And it's really like, parents are like, they just always need to know what's coming next, or they're hyperfixated on the way they look, or they're hyperfixated on, it's not really OCD. It's more, we know with autism brains, they thrive in structure and schedule, right? And they will perseverate on things like.
And perseverate for our listeners means what?
Perseverate is like, how do I explain it? It's like a fixation. It's like it's their special interest. It's something that goes in a loop in a spectrum brain that they can't get out of.
Yeah. Would it be correct to say like it's like tunnel vision?
Yes.
They just zone in on one thing.
Yep.
And they can't get off of it.
And they can't get off of it. And sometimes it can be healthy, right? We've had girls that come in and they perseverate on, we had one that was a track star and she would perseverate on running, right? So it can be healthy and it can be maladaptive too. We had a girl that comes in and she's perseverating on marijuana, and it's not about the marijuana. It's not and sometimes it can be because it can decrease their social anxiety, right? And at the same time, it's maladaptive. Yeah. So we see both.
And you'll see that also with someone with obsessive compulsive disorder. So again, similarities there.
Yeah. So the girl that was, she was perseverating on running.
Yeah.
Her parents were like, she has to get up at 6 a.m. She has to eat this special breakfast every day that I have to make her. Then she has to go to the same track every day. Then she has to run 30 times around the track, or she can't function the rest of the day. Okay, is that OCD or is that spectrum?
Yeah, no, that makes total sense.
Yeah.
Yeah. What about bipolar disorder?
Oh, the bipolar. Oh, when girls come in with bipolar, a lot of it is the hypersexuality, right? Parents get freaked out because they're going out, they're sneaking out to meet with boys, or
probably sending pictures
to get connection. Yeah. And so that can be perceived as hypersexual. Sometimes the substance use, if girls are kind of upping the ante, even though they're on the spectrum, right? Like the substance use can be perceived as bipolar. Also, the mood swings, right? Like doing great during the day, coming home and just blowing up the house, right? Throwing things, punching walls, that can be perceived as bipolar. But if you look at true bipolar, none of these symptoms are bipolar. I think a lot of times the question mark kids, they just get diagnoses thrown on them.
Yeah,
like because someone's trying to make sense of what's going on.
Yeah, that makes sense. And so then that leaves us like major depressive disorder, which I know you've talked about, and then oppositional.
Yeah. Defiant. Right. And depression, MDD, major depressive disorder, is so interesting because I get a lot of kids that come in with that. And especially from hospitals, I feel like when all of this is going on and providers don't know what to do, they'll put major depression on.
Well, and it's easier too for insurance purposes.
Because insurance doesn't pay for autism.
Yeah, but they'll cover that.
They'll cover that. And so if all of these things are going on, insurance, I'm not going to say they don't pay for autism. I'm just saying like it's not a diagnosis that insurance companies love, especially in hospitals. So the major depressive disorder just kind of gets slapped on. And I'm like, okay, it's just a way of like, I think of we don't know what's going on with these girls because in our research, that's the highest diagnosis. That's the largest percentage of misdiagnosed So they're coming in with major depressive disorder and they're leaving with autism level 1.
Fascinating.
Of all the diagnoses.
Okay, so that's the most.
That's the most misdiagnosed.
Okay.
Yep.
Anything you want to say about like oppositional defiant? We kind of touched on that.
Yeah, and ODD, it's really just rigidity, especially, this is so funny. So especially if I get girls that they have a parent, because autism is so genetically predisposed.
Yeah.
It is so genetically predisposed. So as soon as I'm getting questions, I'm like, okay, who in the family is on the spectrum? Who is it? A parent? Is it a grandparent? And it's usually like, and then all of a sudden I hear, she has a brother on the spectrum too. And I'm like, wait, what? Okay. So, or one of the parents are on the spectrum. And so if there's a parent that has some neurodivergence and the student has neurodivergence,
oh yeah, you're going to get explosion.
they're going to butt heads because they're both rigid.
Yep.
Parents rigid, students rigid. Parent has quirks, student has quirks, and they see a lot of similarities in each other that they don't like. And so it's that rigidity. It's like, I know I'm a lot like my dad and I just hate it. I hate it. I'm like, your dad's on the spectrum too. So that makes sense to me. And so it can come across as oppositional, right?
Yeah.
If there's a parent that has that neurodivergence too.
Yeah.
Or a mother, it's just, it's fascinating.
If you have any of the similar personalities issues, then you're definitely going to butt heads, which I'm sure a lot of our listeners and I've seen with my own kids. So
So and that can be defined as they're oppositional.
Yeah.
And no, they're not. So
I love that you're really trying to look at the big picture and put the pieces together more carefully. And not saying that other people aren't trying to do that. It's just it really does take some expertise and time and experience to really be able to say like, no, like we're missing the mark here.
Yep.
So,
yeah.
What are the key signs that practitioners and families should look for when suspecting a misdiagnosis?
Okay. I love, these are the kind of clues I look for. Okay. So the one thing, difficulty with stomach issues. That's a big one.
Interesting.
Yeah. A lot of kids on the spectrum have bowel problems. They have constipation. So I'll get a girl that'll come in and the parents will say, oh yeah, she's sensitive to this. She's had stomach issues. She has constipation. She needs more time in the bathroom. And I'm like, okay, so that's a clue. It's very fascinating. Candy cravings. I get girls that are just obsessed with candy. Now, candy is a self-soothe to the spectrum brain. So girls that are really perseverating over candy and chocolates and, my daughter can't get enough candy. My daughter can't get enough candy. That's all, so that's another clue. A lot of parroting, right? I'm looking for, they'll parrot speeches, they'll mirror kind of sometimes peers. It's really interesting. They'll be like, sometimes they'll come home and have a new term and the parents are like, what? What does that mean? I don't know. I heard it at school. So a lot of parroting and social mimicking, right? A lot of self-soothe things, right? Like I'll see girls that'll be in the same pants for a week and I'm like, oh, why aren't you changing your pants? Oh, these are my comfy pants and I feel comfortable in them and I can go like this and I can, run my hands on them when I get distressed or
that sensory piece.
The sensory piece. A lot of times they have to listen to music a lot, right? Everyone loves music, but this is like over the top, right? Where they have to have music all the time. And it's something like a self-soothe thing in their heads, especially in school. Mm-hmm. That's a big clue. Hygiene struggles. Now it could be not the typical hygiene struggles, but, problems with, showering. Sometimes, they won't like to shower. And you ask the function of it and it's like the sensory, it's just like, I just don't like the feeling. It's like, oh, okay. They present neurotypical and they have all these hygiene struggles as well. Social navigation, experimenting with identities. That's a big one, right? Who am I? I'm trying to fit in. I'm trying to, connect with people. I'm trying to figure out who my identity is. And that some of that can be typical teen. Multiple medication trials I started about. A social navigation, they just don't know how to socially navigate, right? And I talked about a lot of that, like having friends, then dropping friends that can be perceived as borderline, burning out friends, right? Like not knowing socially appropriate times to text, right? Like text bombing or finding a friend and then wanting to spend every minute with that friend because that friend becomes their special interest. And then, things like that.
And those are all really helpful signs and cues that parents can maybe dial in on and maybe they would overlook, right?
Yes. Yeah. Just thinking they're neurotypical.
Yeah. And we've talked about so many on this episode of things that look like a certain diagnosis that maybe parents can take a step back and say, is it more?
Right.
Is there something else we're missing?
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Especially if they're going to treatment and it's not improving. If treatment is not helping, right?
Yeah, that makes sense.
Because they're not getting the right treatment. And so a lot of times they'll change therapists and try a PHP and then they blow out of the PHP and then, get them back into outpatient and they're not getting the correct treatment. So why wouldn't they blow out?
Yeah, that makes sense. And for our listeners who don't know, what's a PHP?
It's like a day treatment.
Okay, more intensive.
Like a day treatment support.
I want to ask you a final question before we end this episode is what are the first steps someone should take if they suspect autism in themselves or a loved one, especially if they're female?
Yeah, that's a really good question. As I've said, I cannot diagnose autism, right? If you're an outpatient provider, this is the sad thing too. The testing is very expensive and a lot of parents can't afford it, right? Insurance companies
do they cover it?
Sometimes if it can be shown as a medical necessity, right? But it's just not out there, like, especially in schools. Like I've worked with school districts that have sent their children to Oasis and we get them an accurate diagnosis of ASD and the school districts are like, we've never seen that. We don't, almost like we don't believe it. It's like, because it's such a new field we're entering right now, right? And so everyone's not on board. Everyone doesn't see the signs.
Yeah.
And then it's, and it's expensive. So if a parent's going to the school and saying, hey, I think my daughter's on the spectrum, can we get testing? The school's going to push back. And then providers and psychologists are usually out months. And so my advice would be is to get a thorough evaluation.
Yeah, it's worth your time.
It's worth your time. And save the money, call your insurance company, find out what they will cover, what providers in the area are contracted to do and the autism testing, right? Mm-hmm. And sad to say, I've even seen it with psychologists in the area that, they disagree. They're like, I don't believe she's on the spectrum and I don't think they need an ADOS. And that is so frustrating.
Sorry, an ADOS is for our listeners.
The ADOS is an autism measure that can accurately diagnose. Not that alone, but it's one of them. Yeah. And so that's the barrier we're finding right now is how do we get all of these girls tested, a good thorough battery, and how can parents afford it? Yeah, so it's a struggle.
Well, and I think you've already touched on this, but it's important to not just find the right tester.
Correct.
But to make sure they have the correct information. They have a team on board, the therapist, the parents, the school, the teachers, everyone being able to collect that data so that you do have a more thorough and comprehensive evaluation, which we're going to talk about in our next episode. Yeah. What does that diagnostic process look like and helping educate our listeners better on understanding it.
Yeah.
Allison, thank you so much for joining us today. I love that you've titled this presentation, Seeing Through the Mask, the Hidden Spectrum, and helping our parents and listeners know that if their daughter is struggling and they're not quite getting their needs met and they're, not moving forward in therapy, that they may be missing the mark and there may be more to this puzzle piece and this may be part of it.
Yeah.
So thank you for your wisdom.
You're welcome.
Thanks.